They weren't supposed to find the cellar. That line was scribbled, no, carved into the underside of a child's bunk discovered during a 1987 renovation of what had once been the Riverside Children's Home in Illinois. The words weren't in ink, they were gouged into wood with what appeared to be a rusted spoon. The floorboards above the basement had been sealed for 175 years. Below them, in perfect cold darkness, investigators found what they called a room designed not for shelter, but for silence. 45 names, scratched into limestone walls with trembling, childish hands. No surnames, just first names, ages, and dates. The last entry read, Emma, 7, July 16th, 1812. No one left. It's just me now. If you're still here, then something in you already knows this isn't just a story about an orphanage. It's about a philosophy of control so ruthless, so methodical, that it disguised itself as virtue. And it was allowed to thrive because no one dared question the system that built it. This isn't just history, it's a mirror. And now, I need you to look into it. In the spring of 1811, Illinois was not yet a state. It was a brutal land of contradictions, clutching Bibles in one hand, muskets in the other. A place caught between the promise of civilization and the savagery of nature. But the greatest danger wasn't in the woods or on the frontier. It lived inside institutions that were supposed to protect the most vulnerable. Riverside Children's Home was one of them. From the outside, it was a refuge, 43 acres of farmland, river access, limestone walls thick enough to endure the punishing Midwestern winters. It had been founded under noble terms, an outpost of compassion in a land ruled by violence. For 5 years, that illusion held, and then came the winter of 1811, a winter so cold it bent iron. Crops failed. Food stores froze. And with that cold came a new name etched into the records of the Illinois Territorial Charitable Society, Josiah Crane, a man who believed America was becoming weak and that children had to be broken in order to become strong. Crane had been forged in war, an officer in the brutal territorial campaigns against native tribes. Wounded twice, left with a limp and a shoulder that no longer worked right. But those scars were nothing compared to the ones inside. He watched men eat their boots to stay alive. He watched others freeze rather than follow orders. In Crane's mind, suffering wasn't something to be avoided, was the crucible in which true character was formed. Comfort was the enemy, and the greatest threat to the American future was childhood itself. He had a theory, and Riverside was where he would test it. December 15th, 1811, his first day, he gathered all 47 children in the dining hall. No warmth, no introduction, no kindness, just one sentence. Weakness is not your birthright, it is your choice. The changes came quickly. Meals cut in half, blankets confiscated, fires extinguished in all but one room. Children as young as 4 were forced to stand outside barefoot in the snow endurance exercises. He called them preparation, he said. This is how the frontier will test you. But there was no frontier. There was just him, a man who had come to believe that cruelty was a higher form of love. And there were the children left behind by war, plague, or poverty, taught to see their suffering not as abuse, but as a necessary ritual, a rite of passage, a sacred preparation for life. The first child to die was Thomas Brennan, 6 years old. Persistent cough. He collapsed during a snow drill. Crane ordered the others to leave him there as a demonstration. Thomas died 3 hours later, and in Crane's logbook, under the boy's name, he wrote, Failure of spirit eliminated. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't hardship. This was doctrine. This was a system, a self-reinforcing spiral of justification and escalation. With each death, Crane doubled down, not because he was blind, but because he believed. He believed that children must suffer in order to survive, that to protect them was to cripple them, and no one questioned him, because the institution had been built to run without interruption, because the reports were buried, because the same logic that justified his cruelty had already been institutionalized. In American thinking, hardship builds virtue, pain builds strength, obedience is love. Tell me, does that sound like a man or a culture? And how many systems today still speak in that voice? By February 1812, 10 children were dead. Crane didn't hide it. He documented it: every body, every failure, every deficiency, mental cowardice, emotional instability, excessive empathy. That last one, empathy, was a punishable offense. One girl, Emma Caldwell, was sentenced to 4 days in the root cellar for sharing her food with a younger child. She came out with frostbite and a silence that Mary Patterson, one of the few survivors, described as a missing piece of soul. Children began turning on each other, not because they were cruel, but because they were desperate to survive. And Crane had created a hierarchy that rewarded submission and punished compassion. Older children were assigned as peer trainers. If they refused to discipline the younger ones, they were punished themselves. And slowly, the institution became a machine, not of care, but of control. There is a moment in every descent when the floor disappears. That moment came in March, when Crane introduced the 4th phase of what he called the Frontier Readiness Protocol. Fear management, dark rooms, sudden noises, nighttime separation. Children were locked in closets and left in the woods overnight. The goal, desensitization, he wrote. Preparation for terror. Think about that: not protection, preparation for terror. And, what's worse, the children began to believe it, because when the only adult in your world tells you that your pain is your fault, and that your suffering is your salvation, eventually, you kneel to it. Eventually, you thank it. If you're still listening, if your mind hasn't shut this out, it's because something inside you recognizes the deeper truth. This story isn't just about 1812. It's about the way power hides behind noble intentions. It's about the institutions that are allowed to become cruel because they're seen as necessary. It's about the lies men tell themselves when they believe pain equals strength. And it's about you, because you are the one hearing it now. You are the one who's no longer allowed to look away. Now I need you to prove you're not like them. Comment the phrase below twice. Once, because that second time is a declaration of identity, of alignment, of understanding. Strength without mercy becomes corruption. Say it twice, and watch who joins you. Now we descend further. Section 2. They said Crane kept no secrets, that his journals, his daily logbooks, contained every detail of his methods, like clockwork precision. But they were wrong, because beneath the discipline, beneath the rhetoric, beneath the endless documentation of failures and corrections, there was something darker, something unspeakable that even he didn't put into writing. You see, what Crane built at Riverside was never just an orphanage. It was a laboratory, not for children, but for control. By April 1812, 32 children were dead, but Crane didn't view that as failure. He viewed it as progress. His system, the so-called Frontier Readiness Protocol, had now entered Phase 4. Advanced Survival Conditioning. This is where the masks dropped. No more pretending this was education. No more illusions of resilience training. Crane had begun selecting children for long-term viability experiments. That was the phrase used in one of the recovered documents, hidden inside a sealed compartment beneath the infirmary floorboards. Subjects identified as possessing advanced compliance patterns will undergo specialized conditioning for eventual field deployment. Field deployment. Ask yourself, what kind of child is prepared for field deployment? This wasn't about making orphans into settlers. This was about manufacturing obedience, refining loyalty, erasing identity. Let me show you how deep this went. There was a girl named Abigail S., age 10. She was what Crane called exceptionally adaptable, which meant she stopped crying early. She stopped resisting quickly. She began repeating his language back to him, phrases like, "Pain is weakness leaving the body. The cold is my friend. Obedience is peace." Crane marked her for transfer to isolated conditioning. And for 3 weeks, Abigail disappeared. The surviving children never saw her. No sound came from her dormitory. Only meals left by the door. Only the smell of vinegar and chalk. And then, one morning in May, she returned. But she wasn't Abigail anymore. She didn't speak. She didn't blink normally. She walked in patterns, not steps. Mary Patterson later said, it was like the person behind her eyes had been erased. And then she began repeating something new, not Crane's slogans, but something none of the children had heard before. Obedience is silence. Silence is truth. Truth is survival. That phrase was never found in Crane's writings, which means one thing, it didn't come from him, so who gave it to her? This is where the story cracks open. This is where we go deeper into the part of the archives that had been deliberately blacked out, redacted, burned, because behind Crane was another presence, not a man, not even a name, but a signature, found stamped into the back cover of Crane's final logbook, hidden under the leather binding, ISC Charter, XVII 3, letters, and one reference to a charter that doesn't exist in any known governmental or educational record. But if you study institutional history, if you understand the hidden architecture of control, you already know what this means. Independent Systems Commission, an unlisted board, supposedly disbanded after 1799, never public, never accounted for, its stated purpose. Assessment and development of sociological resilience methods for frontier populations. Crane didn't invent the readiness protocol. He was chosen to implement it, and Riverside wasn't the first site. It was just the first that collapsed publicly. Here's what they didn't want you to see. In 1988, 1 year after the rediscovery of Riverside's sealed archives, a FOIA request filed by an anonymous researcher led to a partial release of early 19th century military correspondence. Inside it, a letter from a Captain Jeremy Hollis to a superior officer in St. Louis reads, "The Crane subject continues to produce high conformity outcomes in isolation environments. Recommend escalation to Phase 5 and preparation of new test group. The orphanage model proves especially effective for unguarded minds. The Crane subject, not the Crane superintendent, not the Crane commander. Subject, that means he, was being tested to. Crane was not a madman acting alone. He was a participant in a larger design. And now you're starting to see it, aren't you? This wasn't about one man in 1812. This is about how institutions learn to control humans by breaking children. I want you to remember something. The children never fought back, not because they were cowards, not because they were weak, but because the system was designed to make resistance feel impossible. Isolation, deprivation, false hierarchy, moral inversion. If you cried, you were punished. If you showed mercy, you were punished. If you tried to protect someone, you became the next target. This is how control operates across all ages and all eras. Take the innocent, call suffering growth, punish connection, reward silence. It works just as well on adults. Think about your workplace. Think about your school. Think about your government. Who gets rewarded? The ones who conform, the ones who obey, the ones who don't speak of the pain. Obedience becomes survival. Survival becomes truth, and truth becomes whatever they need it to be. The deaths continued by mid-May. Only 12 children remained, and then came the most chilling entry in all of Crane's recovered logs. It was not written in the formal military script like the others. It was scrawled, almost frantic. 12 remain. They no longer cry. They no longer plead. Their eyes are vacant. Conditioning complete. There was no signature. That was the last line ever written. No explanation, number, closure, just silence. And the cellar. You remember that line from section 1. They weren't supposed to find the cellar. That's because the cellar wasn't just for punishment. It was the final chamber, where silence became programming, where the last survivors were, left not to suffer, but to transform. There were metal rings embedded in the stone walls. Scratch, marks, claw patterns, human nail fragments, and on the far wall, a symbol burned into limestone, not with fire, but acid, a triangle inside a circle, a child kneeling at its center, and beneath it, 3 words, make them ready. Tell me honestly, do you still believe this was just history, or are you beginning to understand? This was a template, one that never disappeared, it just evolved into education systems that punish curiosity, into military training that breaks minds to build machines, into government programs that run experiments under the veil of social care, and maybe into modern institutions that still separate, isolate, deprive, and condition. Starting from childhood, in the next section, we follow the 12 survivors. Not all of them died. Some were released, placed quietly, into families across the territory. But there's something strange about those children. They disappeared from records entirely after 1820. No census matches, no marriage licenses, no death certificates, as if they had been erased or reclaimed. Section 3 will uncover what happened to them, and how the hidden hands behind Riverside never stopped moving. And if you're still watching, comment the phrase again to mark your commitment to seeing this through. Strength without mercy becomes corruption. Say it twice, again, because now we're going where they never wanted us to go. Section 3. They thought they had buried it. The reports, the bodies, the names. But they forgot something. You cannot bury a system. You can only relocate it. And that's exactly what they did. Because when the doors of Riverside closed in the autumn of 1812, after the last frost had passed, after the last child was listed missing instead of dead, what replaced it wasn't an investigation. It wasn't outrage. It wasn't justice. It was expansion. 12 children had survived Josiah Crane's experiment. 12 children aged 6 to 15, who had undergone 4 phases of psychological and physical conditioning under an authority who saw them not as human, but as material. When local magistrates arrived in late August, 5 months too late, they found those 12 huddled in the main hall, unspeaking. They didn't cry, they didn't scream. They simply stared. And when asked who was responsible, none of them said Crane. They said nothing at all. The official report was sealed. The burial plots were unmarked, and Crane disappeared. No arrest, no trial. Not even a wanted poster. According to one surviving territorial record, the only entry after August 1812 regarding his name was this: Subject JC, withdrawn from active protocol site. Return to origin, recommended for debrief and redeployment. Return to origin. Ask yourself, what origin? Let me tell you what they don't teach in American history books. Between 1812 and 1825, there was a sudden increase in federal land grants, awarded for the establishment of charitable facilities across 6 newly forming states: Indiana, Missouri, Arkansas, Michigan, Wisconsin, and yes, Illinois again. Many of these grants were given to private boards with no public accountability. Most claimed to provide care for orphans, settlers, children, or defective youth. Their locations were remote. Their charters often matched in phrasing, and all had similar security designs: high walls, stone basements, underground chambers. They weren't orphanages. They were CONTINUATION. Riverside was never an isolated event. It was a pilot program, and the 12 children who survived, they were not released into freedom. They were distributed. Let's start with one, Mary Patterson. She was 14 when Riverside collapsed, according to surviving correspondence found in the Illinois State Archives in 1991. Mary was placed with a family in western Missouri. They were listed as pro-development foster caretakers, a term that appears nowhere in pre-Civil War documentation except in one place. ISC Charter XVIIV. That's the same shadow directive found in Crane's final journal, the same charter stamped into the back of a classified training manual uncovered in a 1978 military declassification titled Conditioned Compliance: Youth Resilience in Frontier Scenarios. Mary didn't die in Missouri. She vanished. Her foster family was found murdered 6 months after her placement, their throats slit, no valuables taken, no signs of forced entry. Mary was gone, never heard from again. Child number 2, Samuel Harrison, the one who had once protected the others, the one who broke under pressure and became an enforcer. He was relocated to a Pennsylvania trade school under a new name, Simon Hale. Records show he graduated top of his class twice, but both times the institutions burned down shortly after his departure. One in 1816, one in 1819. No survivors, no arrests. Just a man with no past and a talent for starting over. By 1831, there are no further public records of Simon Hale, but a recently uncovered ledger from a now-defunct Washington, D.C. intelligence agency lists a payment issued to an unnamed field agent, SH-12, for compliance, observation, and institutional metrics. You're starting to see the pattern. They didn't release these children, they recruited them now. Think what happens when you take a child, who's been isolated, broken, deprived, who's been taught to equate obedience with survival, who's been praised only when inflicting pain, who's been told that mercy is weakness and silence is virtue. What do you create? Not a person, a tool, a device of enforcement wrapped in a human shell. And when they grow up, you place them in positions of authority. You send them to train others. You use them to shape the future. Here's the chilling part. In 2003, a private researcher, an anthropologist named Laura Greeran, covered similarities in linguistic phrasing between the journals of 1812 Riverside and transcripts from a 1954 juvenile rehabilitation program in upstate New York. Phrases like, suffering is a stage of strength, to speak is to betray, loyalty is proven through silence. The New York program had been shut down for irregular disciplinary practices. The staff denied everything, but buried in a closet, in a sealed room never entered by officials, Greer found a small notebook. Its pages were filled with words in perfect 19th century cursive, and the last page bore a phrase, obedience is silence. Silence is truth. Truth is survival. That same phrase spoken by Abigail in 1812, nearly 150 years later, it reappears. That's not coincidence. That's continuity. That's what happens when a protocol is too effective to abandon. It mutates. It adapts, but it never goes away. Riverside wasn't erased. It was rebranded, and those 12 children weren't victims. They were the first generation of a psychological conditioning system so deep, so carefully hidden, that it survives even new in prisons, schools, military prep, detention centers, and if you think that's conspiracy, answer this. Why did the ISC Charter 18 records remain classified under the Department of Defense until 1999? Why did every single Riverside-related name receive sealed postmortem files? Why did Abigail S., the girl who stopped blinking, end up buried in an unmarked grave with her head shaved and her hands bound? This is what they fear you realizing, that systems of control do not need whips or cages. They need ritual. They need obedient survivors. They need people who were broken as children and taught never to question pain. And once you see the pattern, once you recognize how deep it runs, you can never unsee it. That's what you feel right now, isn't it? Not fear, but clarity. You're not watching a video, you're being unplugged from the lie. In the next section, we go to 1987, to the men who uncovered Riverside's remains, to the journals they were told not to share, to the classified report labeled Resonance Echo, legacy systems of psychological structuring, and to what happened when they tried to speak out. Before we go there, you know what to do. Comment the phrase again one more time. Speak it like a seal. Strength without mercy becomes corruption. Twice, because if you've come this far, you're not just a viewer. You're now part of the resistance. And now, it's time to trace the bloodline of this system forward to our time, to our institutions. You ready to see the future that they started building in 1812? You were never supposed to hear this. Not from them, not from me, not from anyone. Because in 1987, a file was marked top-line observation, internal only, and sent to a restricted archive buried beneath the Illinois Department of Public Health. It was labeled Project Resonance Echo. Its subtitle, Psychological Structuring Artifacts, Riverside Child Development Site, 1812, Continuity Evidence and Institutional Echoes. Only 6 people read it. 3 are dead. 2 disappeared. The last, he left a message, 1 sentence, scrawled onto the back of a 1972 medical intake form, found inside an abandoned mental hospital on the outskirts of Rockford. It said, "They're still using it. The names change. The methods don't. Let me show you what that means. It began in June 1987 during a routine zoning review. The city of Rockford planned to demolish the last standing structure of what had once been Riverside Children's Home by then, an overgrown ruin, before demolition. The Illinois State Historical Society requested a quick walkthrough to determine if anything could be preserved. What they found was not debris, it was the cellar, and beneath that cellar, a second chamber, unmarked, unmapped, undisturbed. The first official on scene was structural investigator Daniel Reyes, a former Navy engineer. He reported finding limestone walls covered in fingernail scratches, dozens of first names carved in perfect lines, spaced evenly, some upside down. What appeared to be a chalk circle in the far corner, surrounded by 12 small indentations the size of children's knees, and one more word, chiseled deeper than the rest: listen. Reyes took photographs, he made measurements, and then he was ordered to stop. 2 men in suits from a federal agency never identified arrived within 48 hours. The site was sealed. The demolition was accelerated, but Reyes had already made copies of his findings. And in October 1987, he mailed a package to a colleague in Boston, Dr. Lena Montrose, a clinical historian specializing in early American institutional care. Her response: 12 pages of analysis and 1 chilling line. What you found is not a shelter. It's a behavioral lab designed to strip children of identity, language, and empathy systematically, completely. But it didn't end there. Montrose cross-referenced Reyes cellar photographs with Civil Warrior architectural schematics. What she discovered: the Riverside design matched 3 other facilities, one in Kentucky, one in Virginia, and one in upstate New York, each built between 1813 and 1820, each destroyed in suspicious fires, each having been labeled asylums, and each following the exact same blueprint down to the number of beds, the angles of the basement walls, the placement of the chalk circle. Let me be clear, this wasn't charity, it wasn't religion, it wasn't medicine, it was something else. In December of 1987, Reyes went silent. His wife reported him missing. No note, no trace. His apartment appeared unlived, in despite evidence of recent meals. Montrose tried to go public. She contacted 6 newspapers, 2 universities, a local station in Chicago. She got no response until February 2nd, 1988, when her car exploded outside her office. No survivors. The investigation labeled it an accident due to fuel line rupture, but a janitor later found an envelope in her desk drawer marked "If I disappear." Inside it, 3 pages of analysis and a burned corner of a file stamped with one word: replication. Now listen closely. This is where the past rips into the present, because 1 year after the Reyes discovery, in 1988, the United States government launched a pilot program under the Office of Juvenile Justice called Integrated Behavior Hardening. It claimed to prepare at-risk youth for societal reintegration through strict discipline, isolation therapy, and resilience conditioning. Sound familiar? 3 facilities were chosen, 1 in Alabama, 1 in Nevada, 1 in rural Illinois. The Illinois site, less than 12 miles from the old Riverside Foundation and its interior. Designed by an anonymous architectural consultant using a blueprint recovered from historical archives. They said it was inspired by early American values. They didn't say whose values. They didn't say Crane's. But that's what they used. The Illinois Behavior Facility ran until 1996. It was closed after multiple complaints of child neglect and unexplained injuries, but no charges were filed, no public inquiries, and all records were sealed. Why? Because in 1997, a think tank known as the Northbridge Group received a government contract to analyze historical methods of youth compliance management. Among the documents recovered from their private archive in 2022, a transcript, a training manual, and a phrase repeated throughout, always in bold. Suffering clarifies the self. Control builds the citizen. And this, Stage 4 resistance collapse, optimal when combined with environmental silence, dietary limitation, and peer betrayal. Stage 4, just like Crane's fourth phase at Riverside. Fear. Management, isolation, DESENSITIZATIO. The protocol didn't die, it evolved. Now ask yourself, how many times have you heard stories of group homes where abuse went ignored, of troubled youth centers where the same cycle repeats, of behavioral boot camps where children come out worse than they went in? And why do those stories never stay in the news? Why do the names change, but the blueprint never does? Because the structure remains the same. Because the system, the real system, isn't based on compassion, it's based on control. And the origin of that system, Riverside, 1812, Josiah Crane. But let me offer you a darker possibility. What if this protocol wasn't just an accident? What if it wasn't an anomaly? What if it was the prototype for something bigger? A template, a script, not for a building, but for a culture. Look at our world today. Look at how obedience is praised, how rebellion is how children are punished, not for doing wrong, but for being difficult. Look at our schools, our prisons, our workplaces, and now ask, who benefits from generations trained to obey without asking why? Who gains from a population that equates endurance with morality, silence with virtue, and pain with growth? Not you, not me, but someone. You feel it now, don't you? That ache behind your eyes, that tremor in your ribs, that rising clarity that what you're hearing is not a story, it's a diagnosis. And if you don't resist it, if you don't start seeing it, you'll pass it on to your kids, to your students, to yourself, because systems don't die when people forget them. They die when people refuse to repeat them. You ready for Section 5? We're about to uncover the survivors, the ones who escaped, the ones who didn't, and what they did when they finally remembered who they were. Before we go there, say it again, louder, because they're watching now. Strength without mercy becomes corruption. Twice as always, we continue next, and what comes may shake you more than anything. She didn't speak for 53 years, not a word. Not to her adoptive parents, not to her therapists, not to the parade of well-meaning caseworkers who asked her the same shallow questions with the same empty smiles. Mary Patterson, she was one of the last confirmed survivors of the Riverside Children's Home, admitted in July of 1811, at the age of 5, declared missing in March of 1812, assumed dead after a presumed winter illness. But she wasn't dead. She was hidden by someone who risked everything to get her out. And when Mary finally spoke in 1865, during a nervous episode at a convalescent home in Wisconsin, her first words were, "He made us thank the silence." You want to know what broke her? It wasn't the cold. It wasn't the beatings. It wasn't even the deaths. It was the gratitude. The way the children were trained to whisper thanks after every punishment. How they were made to hug each other after public humiliations. How they were forced to sing lullabies after isolation drills. Crane called it emotional inversion. Psychologists today call it trauma bonding. He called it strength. She called it brainwashing. Mary was 5 by the time she escaped. She no longer remembered her real last name. She no longer remembered her mother's voice. She no longer cried when another child disappeared, because she had been taught that grief was disobedience, and obedience was the only way to survive. In her fragmented recollections, scattered across decades of institutional files, Mary described the last week at Riverside before it all ended. She said the snow stopped falling on March 2nd, 1812. That's when the last night began. She called it the departure drill. Crane had lined up the remaining children in the basement at that point, ages 4 to 12, he made them repeat, "I am not mine. Pain makes me useful. He decides when I leave." Each child was then assigned a number and taken into the room with the bowl. Mary never explained what the bowl was, only that the children who went in didn't come back. She was number 37, but number 36, an older girl named Clara, refused. She screamed, she bit Crane's hand, she shattered the bowl against the limestone floor, and that was when it all unraveled. A groundskeeper named Samuel Hurster, Civil War deserter hiding under a false name, heard the screams, and for the first time in over a year, he acted. He broke the door with an iron rod. He grabbed Mary and Clara, and he ran through snow, through forest, through silence. He made it 11 miles before collapsing outside a Quaker farmhouse. He was arrested. They called him a kidnapper, but Mary couldn't speak. Clara was too delirious to testify, so they were taken to a holding facility, and Crane, he was cleared of wrongdoing after testifying that Hurst was mentally unstable and violent. Case closed, no charges filed, but the next day, Riverside burned to the ground every record, every structure, every secret gone on, except the 2 girls, and Samuel Hurst, who was never seen again. Now ask yourself, why was Crane never prosecuted? Why was Riverside never investigated? Why were her actions dismissed as madness? Because institutions protect themselves. Because the system always has an alibi. Because even in 1812, the public had already been trained to believe that children were better off disciplined than understood. And because cruelty in the name of order has always been easier to accept than chaos in the name of truth. But the story didn't end there, because Mary lived, and Clara, she would die in 1823 from untreated infections. Behind something powerful, a journal. It's only 42 pages long. Water damaged, faint, but legible. And on page 17, she wrote something that cracked the lie open forever. He said we were born empty, that pain fills us. But I remember the girl who made me laugh. I remember the way she shared her bread, and I know I was not empty, he lied. That's the line. That's the counterspell, because once you realize you are not empty to begin with, the entire system loses its grip, and the spell breaks. Now, we reach the part you're not going to want to hear, but you need to, because you need to understand how this pattern continues. Mary's story isn't rare, it's repeated again and again. New names, new flags, new slogans, from the Indian boarding schools of the 1800s, to the Magdalen laundries in Ireland, to the Scared Straight programs of the 1980s, to the modern wilderness therapy camps that still operate today with little oversight, and thousands of abuse claims. The method is always the same. Isolate the vulnerable. Strip identity. Replace compassion with control. Reframe obedience as salvation. And, above all, make them thank the silence. There's something else in the archives of the Quaker farmhouse where Mary and Clara were first taken. A volunteer, historian in 2009, found a letter, unsigned. Its handwriting matches Clara's. It says, "They will keep trying to make new Riversides. But the walls aren't just stone, they're inside us too. If we carry them, the house rebuilds. If we speak, it falls." That's why this video exists. Not to tell a ghost story, but to crack a code that's still running. A code inside society. And maybe inside you, if you ever praised someone for toughening up without asking what broke them, if you ever told a child what doesn't kill you makes you stronger without helping them heal, if you ever kept silent when cruelty was justified by order, discipline, or structured in somewhere. Crane's shadow moved through you, and now you know it, and now you must choose, because Section 6 is next, and Section 6 will not be gentle. It is the reckoning, the confrontation, the final breath of the house that was never meant to speak again. So ask yourself this before we continue. Are you ready to face the truth of what you've repeated? If so, write it once, then write it again, then speak it aloud. Strength without mercy becomes corruption. Strength without mercy becomes corruption. This is your ritual now to break theirs. They said it was buried, but they were wrong, because some things don't stay beneath the earth. They don't rot. They don't fade. They wait. They wait for the right generation to remember. And now you are that generation. Let me show you what's still standing, not in the woods of Illinois, but inside the very bones of the world you were raised in. You've already seen the pattern. You've already felt the tremor. But the final truth isn't in the ruins, it's in what the ruins became. Because Riverside didn't die in 1812. It changed uniforms. It slipped into the fabric of youth reform, emotional resilience, correctional education. Crane's doctrine wasn't discredited. It was rebranded. Let me show you the chain. From orphanage to asylum, from asylum to juvenile reform school, from reform to residential treatment facility, from facility to therapeutic boarding school. Different names. Same function, same blueprint, same silence. Want proof? In 2004, an anonymous whistleblower released over 3,000 pages of internal training documents from a youth behavioral institute in Colorado. It was called the Brightvale Center, privately funded, publicly silent, advertised as a healing space for troubled teens. But within the files were schedules that mirrored Crane's exact protocol. Stage 1, deprivation, 72 hours, silence. Stage 2, emotional realignment, isolation with reward prompts. Stage 3, submission, drill, scripted confessions under pressure. Stage 4, public reintegration group, discipline with praise, feedback. These were word-for-word descendants of the 1812 Riverside Doctrine, even the layout of the facility 4 halls. Central tower, tour room, basement was nearly identical. Coincidence or continuity? Then, in 2011, an independent film crew attempted to create a documentary on forgotten American orphanages. They visited the former site of Riverside, now a conservation zone. Just forest. No signs. No plaques. But during filming, the crew's metal detection equipment picked up irregular shapes beneath the soil. Digging was not permitted. They were escorted off the property by local authorities. But the night before, their sound engineer had left a field mic running. What it captured between 2:13 and 2:26 a.m. was not explainable. The tape has no visual, just audio. But here's the transcript. Wind blowing, soft footsteps, barefoot. Childlike child's voice whispering, "Are we done?" Silence, then more whispers and clear, second child's voice. "He's still listening." Third child's voice very close to mic. "Tell them, please tell them." That tape was confiscated by state officials the next day, but the transcript survived, and if real, it suggests something deeper, not just trauma, but imprint, an echo that never stopped ringing. Why does this matter? Because you are still inside the architecture, the beliefs you were taught, the way you were disciplined, the voices in your head that shame you when you cry, or break, or speak truth. They are the walls of Riverside, rebuilt inside your nervous system. Crane never needed the building, he just needed a pattern, and he built it inside the culture. You think you're free? Ask yourself, why do I flinch when someone raises their voice? Why do I say I'm fine when I'm shattered? Why do I feel guilty resting, speaking, resisting? Whose voice taught you that? Whose design does that serve? Because it wasn't yours, and it wasn't your ancestors. It was his, but now you have a choice. Because while the pain is inherited, so is the power to break it. You think Crane feared rebellion. He didn't. He feared memory. He feared someone someday connecting the dots. That someone is you. And this is how it ends. Repeat after me. The silence is not holy. The obedience is not healing. The scars are not signs of strength. They are warnings. Say it again. This is not poetry. It's armor. Because after this moment, after hearing this story, you carry something dangerous. Awareness, and awareness in a world built on forgetting is revolution. So here's what I ask you to do. Not for me, not for this channel, but for yourself, for those 45 children, for Clara, for Mary, for Samuel Hurst, who ran barefoot through snow to save a child the world had already erased. Ask yourself every day, am I living by my own design, or someone else's program? And then break it. Speak when they tell you to be silent. Question when they expect your praise. Protect those still too young to name what's wrong, because Riverside is still out there, not as a building, but as a blueprint. Every time we allow pain to pass without witness, it grows stronger. But every time you say, strength without mercy becomes corruption, you tear out a piece of its foundation. So stand now, not in fear, not in rage, but in absolute, terrifying clarity. Because the house is crumbling, the silence is cracking, and the ones who were taken, they were never gone. They've been waiting for you, for this. Now, speak for them. Say it with me. Say it louder than ever. Strength without mercy becomes corruption. Strength without mercy becomes corruption. This was their story, but it's also yours. Now go make sure it's never told again. Not like that. Not ever. We end where the silence began, and from here, you build something they could never imagine. A world without the walls. A world that remembers.